So the dominoes have started to fall into place. Announcements this morning that Daniel Ricciardo officially moves to McLaren from 2021 onwards, and Carlos Sainz goes from McLaren to Ferrari to take that vacant space left by Sebastian Vettel. Vettel now the only piece of that particular puzzle that we're yet to hear what his future plans are. Let's talk about that then. Let's start with the Daniel Ricciardo to McLaren move, and let's talk about it first of all from a McLaren perspective, because from that side of things, for me, it's a great move. It's exactly what McLaren need, not only because he's a great driver, he's a feisty, aggressive driver on the racetrack. We all know what he can do in the right car, and I think that will be brilliant for McLaren. It also brings some considerable experience to line up alongside Lando, who's also a brilliant driver, but yet to gain the experience necessary to help develop a car in the same way that perhaps Daniel can do. The other big thing, and I've been talking to my colleagues over the last couple of days about this, again last night, knowing the announcement was coming this morning, they are very, very excited about this. The McLaren team will get a huge boost from the arrival of Daniel Ricciardo, and what I mean by that is just the boost that it'll give the garage, because of the character that he is. And this is no slight on Carlos Sainz, because I think the mood in the garage has been good. It's been one of positivity over the last year anyway. That partnership of Sainz and Lando Norris has been brilliant for the team. And you can sense that, can't you, just around the team, the way they portray themselves through the media, the way that they are becoming much more open, and it seems like a much more fun place than the way it's been over the last couple of years before that. I think the arrival of Daniel Ricciardo will only take that up a notch, and you can even imagine the fun that those two guys will be having together and how that will cascade its way down through the team, because it absolutely does, I can assure you. You all look as team members to your driver lineup as the sort of figureheads of the team. You look to them for leadership, for inspiration. You thrive off them. You get your energy from the way that a driver is portraying himself and the way that he puts himself forward, both in the car and out of the car. So I think Daniel will really give a big boost in that sense to the team, which is great news. It's another step for McLaren's rebuild back towards success, championship success, isn't it? So I think it's a really positive move in that sense, and it really cements a team that McLaren are now building, both in terms of their drivers, also in terms of other key personnel. Seidel, of course, has well been a real strength to the McLaren lineup. So I think they're creating something now, building from the ground up after the disappointment of the Honda years, where they've really started to go back to square one, to put the pieces in place and to gradually build a long-term plan back towards success. Big wind tunnel being built at McLaren right now ahead of the introduction of the cost cap next year. Mercedes engines, of course, coming for next year as well. And let's talk about that quickly. Mercedes engines will be a big boost, of course, to McLaren. 2021 will be a compromise for the team, because they've got a car that they've got right now for 2020 designed specifically for that Renault power unit. They're going to switch to the Mercedes power unit, which will mean there will be some compromise in terms of the chassis and the way those two elements of the car are integrated. Whether it's a significant compromise, only time will tell. They may get lucky, they may get unlucky in that sense. I still think the advantages that the Mercedes power unit will bring will be a positive, and of course Daniel's looking at those kind of things in helping to make his decision to move to the team. He nearly went there, didn't he, before his Renault move? So he's always been interested. We know that the team have always been interested in him. Finally, they've been able to make that happen. How about from Daniel's perspective then? I don't think it's any major secret that he would have probably preferred the Ferrari seat if it had been a seat that allowed him to challenge for a world title. And perhaps the Ferrari seat, other than a Mercedes seat and a Red Bull seat, both of those probably which aren't available, probably would have been his best shot at a world title. McLaren maybe in the longer term, probably not in the shorter term. So you could argue that the McLaren seat is perhaps a second best option if you're Daniel Ricciardo. But we don't know what the talks were with Ferrari. Presumably there were some. Presumably that was definitely an option on both sides at some point in time. But if Ferrari were after a driver that wasn't going to upset the apple cart, that wasn't going to necessarily challenge with the aggressiveness that you might expect Daniel Ricciardo to take on Charles Leclerc, if he was being if they were looking for somebody to take second seat, to take a number 2 type position, well then Daniel Ricciardo probably didn't want that either. So I think all round this is a good move for him, it's a good move for McLaren, and I think that this could be the best option that Daniel Ricciardo had if the Ferrari seat is no longer available. So I think big thumbs up on that side of things. Let's look at the other one then, Carlos Sainz to Ferrari. If you're Ferrari, you all know my opinion because I've said it over the last few days, my first thought would have been, let's get Daniel Ricciardo in there. That would have been a real positive, courageous, exciting move for Ferrari and for Ferrari fans. But if you're Ferrari, perhaps you've got to look at a bit more than that. You've got to look at internal politics. You've got to look at what you're building for the future at that team. And that undoubtedly is centred around Charles Leclerc. Therefore, taking somebody like Carlos Sainz, I don't think this is any disrespect to Carlos in saying they think he will be perhaps a little bit more compliant, perhaps a little bit more of a calm nature, somebody who's not as desperate to win a world title yet because he's still very early in his career, and therefore perhaps he has a bit more time on his hands, and therefore perhaps they can work those two together and move the team forward with a view to taking a Constructors' Championship as well. I think Carlos Sainz is an incredibly good driver, been underrated at times in his career. We've only really started to see the very best in him in his last year at McLaren when he's been given the freedom and felt in a comfortable, happy place at that team. I hope he's able to find something similar at Ferrari so we still get the best out of him there. But he's young, he's got time on his hands, as I say. He will look at this as perhaps the biggest opportunity that he could have had up until, in his career to date. And I don't blame him at all for grasping that with both hands. I just hope that it doesn't end up being a negative move in that we've seen drivers go to Ferrari in the past with all sorts of intentions only to be shot down in flames when the team puts all of its eggs into one basket and pins everything onto one driver and asks the other driver to be essentially a backup. I hope that doesn't happen to Carlos. He will of course be going there with the absolute belief in himself that he's the best driver in the world. He will believe that he's able to take on Leclerc, and no matter what grounds he's gone there on in terms of his contract, he'll believe that over time his results in the car can elevate him to the status of either equal or a number 1 position in that team. If he beats Charles Leclerc over a consistent period, they will pin their colours to him, just like what happened with Leclerc over a 4-time world champion in Sebastian Vettel. So I think really interesting moves on both sides. I think both could turn out to be really, really positive moves. Exciting for us as fans to see what happens. The one remaining piece in that little part of the jigsaw is what happens now to Sebastian Vettel. Does he retire? There's a lot of speculation, and I think it's more than that he was offered a role at McLaren but potentially turned that down. Now, if he did indeed turn that down on the grounds that perhaps it wasn't championship winning material, where else is he going to find that on the grid? I can't see him going to Mercedes to line up alongside Lewis. Why would he do that? Why would he put himself up against Lewis in his own team at this stage in Sebastian's career? I don't think I can see him going back to Red Bull because for the same reasons does he want to put himself up against Max Verstappen at this point when the team's centred around him, and therefore where else could he possibly go with a chance at a championship, certainly in the short term. So I don't know, still to be decided upon or still to be announced at the very least, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if we see Sebastian Vettel retire from Formula 1. It'll be a shame, as I've mentioned already. He's a great driver, he's a great character, he's been a great asset to Formula 1 despite his mistakes and his misjudgments over time. I do think it'll be a shame to see him walk away, potentially walking away not in front of any fans, as the remainder of this season may well play out in that sense. So anyway, I'd love to know your thoughts on those two particular moves that have been announced so far. Sainz to Ferrari, Ricciardo to McLaren. Let me know what you think. Good moves, bad moves? Would you have done something different? Are you excited to see what happens over the course of 2020 and beyond as these things all start to take effect? For now, thanks very much, and I'll see you very, very soon. Ta-da.